pizza. Personally, I don't eat pizza, so I could talk for a while and I don't care. Are you a big pizza eater?
Well, I looked at it for a while, but fortunately not that much.
Not that much. There's the on button. While I find the on button, could you introduce yourself to everyone? Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Elena. I started a company here in Scotland called Yaldi Games, and I wanted to make games that have real actionable knowledge inside games, but aren't educational games, because I don't like educational games, but I really like learning. I'm a big hobbyist, I like learning about all kinds of hobbies, knitting, crocheting, foraging, and that actually started my whole passion. So I thought, I'm gonna make a game with some real plants, some real stuff, real crafts, so that people can take it into the real world.
So bringing your own interest into a game, that's fabulous. And you're our hero this evening. Woo! How does it feel to be a hero? Is that good? Yeah, okay. Does Yaldi mean anything? Because I don't know what it means.
Yeah, well, when I moved to Scotland, Yaldi was used by my boss in the first job that I had, and he said, well, when I asked him what it meant, he said, Google it. Very charming. And then I did, and it says that it was essentially a Glaswegian slang for just, joy and enthusiasm, and apparently it might stem from a phrase called giving it Laldi, which means to give it your all, and maybe then, it developed that way to just be maybe a football game.
That's a lovely story. Oh, please, there was a real reason for it, because I had no idea. So thank you for that. And so I've got a couple of questions here about, we're going to get into a little bit of funding conversation, if that's all right. Because I just, I look around the room here and I see lots of small and emerging and up-and-coming studios. They need the money. Mm-hmm. And you've tried lots of things with varying degrees of success. Can we have a chat about Kickstarter first? So do you want to take us through your Kickstarter experience?
Yeah, it is the last one of my funding journey. That was last year in October that we did the Kickstarter. Essentially, we really wanted to give that funding food to go, because I've been essentially bootstrapped through grants until we did the Kickstarter. And Kickstarter is really interesting. It's a great platform for certain type of games. Right. Also board games, fantastic, but it's good for life simulators like our games. So that's mostly the reason why we did it. It's also great for like action RPGs, roguelikes, and all these things. Where you essentially you're able to bring in your community that you have built before. So we were essentially very very early on active on TikTok. And once we saw that the numbers were right, we had a few viral hits, we had a good following, we were thinking, okay, we're going to start preparing for Kickstarter. And it does take a while to prepare for it. The platform itself is perfect to use, but there's lots of thoughts to put into the design of your page, the design of your stretch goals, what's the actual what's your public goal, what's your internal goal, and then into the entire process of marketing the game during the campaign, even if you have funding, like pre-launch, post-launch, lots of things. So yeah, quite complex.
What do you mean about public goal, sort of internal goal and public goal? What does that mean?
Well, essentially it means that, with Kickstarter you always have to consider momentum. So there are, for example, there are studios like a Kickstarter campaign like Meet and Enriches that was tremendously successful last January. So their public goal was, I think, around 30,000 euros, because it was a Spanish studio, and that essentially was a sum chosen to be achieved quickly, so that acceleration leads to more money. Because there's, for example, other studios that set a higher goal, 50 or 80,000, and the problem is if you set like a goal that's too high, the momentum will die during the campaign, and that's really the tricky part, because people don't want to commit to something that isn't funded yet. So the thinking here is it's a bit of a risk, like how much risk you want to take, but you have to think of like how low can I go to then use the momentum to actually get where I want to be. So yeah.
So if you set too high a target, people are just put off by the fact that you're never going to get there.
Yeah, if you've not been funded in the first, week, then it just looks really bad. It almost looks like even though they're not going to be charged until the campaign is successful, they will not put in the money. It's just like a Kickstarter has a lot to do with like just the psychology of people's trust and momentum of things.
And consumers are fickle, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're an awkward bunch. But you think a week is the first week is the most important week. That's when you get things.
Well, actually, I mean the first 2 days.
First 2 days, okay.
You always see that you get a banner on TikTok on Kickstarter if you are funded within the first 12 hours, like 4 hours or 48 hours. So essentially, you wanna set your goal so that you can achieve that, so that you can get the banner, and that banner you can use that on all of your marketing assets, on Facebook, on your ads. And that just shows people, oh my god, okay, this is lifting off, this is really, like other people are buying this. And yeah, it just creates that momentum that you need.
And what was the game that you put on Kickstarter today? Tell us a little bit about the game, chance to sell here.
Well, it's called Out and About. Really, it's a life simulator with an open world where you can go foraging, you can explore kind of biomes, and you can find different plants and mushrooms in those that you take back, and then you cook with it. It's like a community kitchen, and you can essentially cook. You choose the characters that you want to cook with, and they all have their special traits. And what you create are essentially real life things. So you'll get the recipe for it. Lots of herbal tinctures and remedies and salves, but also some really great cakes and cookies and like juices and lemonades, like really cool stuff that I love personally. And then you can sell it at the farmers market, because who doesn't love the farmers market? While also learning about herbalism. So if someone comes with a headache and you know that you picked meadowsweet, you can give them a meadowsweet tincture, or if they come with a wound, you could give them yarrow because it's a styptic. So it's actually a lot more survival than a lot of the other survival games. But yeah, very cozy, no violence.
It's not in the survival genre, is it? You can't sneak it in there when no one's looking.
Maybe in the future if we can get like Bear Grylls or something.
He's probably cheap. And how did it go? I mean, you don't have to tell us all the numbers and all the private stuff, but how did it go?
It went really well. I mean, it was a good start. We didn't get funded in the exact 2 days, but shortly after the 2 days, so we didn't get that banner. But it was a huge relief to get to the point where it was funded. And I think the only thing that kind of we messed up is that our stretch goals were set out to be very ambitious, with larger gaps between the stretch goals. But then when I understood the momentum psychology, I had to redo those stretch goals, because I really wanted them to be shorter so that I could post more often about achieving a stretch goal, which gets more momentum. But also it was a lot of pressure, because then I had to get up at 7 a.m. on Saturday before they hit the stretch goal and do the update. So yeah, I wouldn't recommend that exactly again, but just really thinking about maybe having different sets of stretch goals depending on momentum, because then you could just,
Well, can we dive into that a little bit more? Because Kickstarter was exceptionally popular quite a few years ago, and it sort of died away, and a lot of the games industry experience was you've made all of these commitments that you're going to do to consumers, and then it just becomes too much work. How do you get those right now in terms of the goals and the rewards that you give to people? How do you balance that? Is it guesswork, or are there methods you can use to sort of reduce the risk of that?
Well, I think one of the best examples is probably to point out Ukie and the Witch's Mountain, because their stretch goals were just so tiny. They raised $1 million, and I think they spent actually almost $500,000 on marketing. Just so you guys know, I mean, it's expensive. Return on ad spend is 2 to 3 in games, right? So whenever you see someone raising a lot, you have to consider that a lot of that is going to go into paying for the ads that the agencies are paying for them upfront. But yeah, I think there's a lot of smaller stretch goals that were essentially we're going to add a new tarot card. I mean, that's what amount of effort is that for an artist to make? There's no cost at all involved in that, really. And then there's a new outfit. We had a few outfits there. I mean, we had outfits as rewards, not as a general community award, but they had outfits as stretch goals, right? So I mean, that's also not that expensive. For that art style, 3 days for an artist. So really thinking about what things were you already planning to do, and what things are easy to integrate. So, for example, we added die making as a stretch goal because actually it was really cool because we had a survey going out as part of one of the agencies that we were working with. So we got live data from people filling out that survey, so like 1,200 people answered that survey, where I asked them, what are you most passionate about this game? Just to check. So foraging scored the most, so I knew that, romancing, well, I'm just gonna shelve that, like just foraging. I have to focus on that experience. And then they also, I asked them, what else could we add? And a few of them said, die making, or were really interested in that. And I had one of the influencers that is going to be a character in the game. Actually, she started doing ink making. And so die making, really, when I looked into it, was essentially just a recipe. and it would tie really well in with some, just different, maybe like just skins for the outfits. So, like with these decisions, I think you always just have to think about how much is it going to cost, and then you definitely have to just, the gap between the stretch goals is not the budget that you have for that feature. You should take a third of that, and if that fits, then it's okay.
We're going to move off Kickstarter, if that's all right. I mean, I've got a lot more questions about it, but let's move off to alternative. I think so you said it was one of the last fundraising things you did, and prior to that you did grant applications. Do you want to do a shout out for some grant applications that you won and enjoyed winning, and maybe if there are any tips and tricks for people in the room of how they can be as successful as you were? Because on your website there's a whole load of logos of grants that you've managed to garner over the years. Take us through that process.
Yeah, so when I started the business, I was very much quite business focused, so I went to a lot of accelerators because I was essentially a startup out of the University of Edinburgh, so I started as the Summer Startup Accelerator and a business pitch there. And then I went on to the Converge Creative Challenge, which is a challenge open to everyone that is a student at a university in Scotland, but only 2 years after graduation. So, but you can essentially pitch there. There are different categories, and back then there was a very specific creative one. And I pitched for that, and I won. And then there's the Young Innovator Award from Young Innovate UK. So when I was still younger than 30, I was able to apply to that. And then, so that was a year essentially long. And then after that, I was able to apply to something called Innovate UK Next Steps, which was like a 50,000 grant, it's typical Innovate UK, which is kind of split up in these tranches, like 33, 12, 5. Yeah, and I think then essentially on top of that, it's been a few smaller ones. I think there's a small company in Glasgow called the Social Shifters. They do something every year. So we won the Social Shifters Global Innovation Challenge, which was I think $10,000, like sponsored by SAP or something. And then the Ukie Games Fund, we all know that one. Of course, the prototype fund is available to everyone to apply. Always important to have that business angle, right? To look at the marketing data, give them the good data, because I think it's just not gonna. Like a lot of these grants that I won, I got them because of the business angle and because of being able to advertise, okay, this game has some educational value, it has the well-being value, accessibility to nature's games. There's a lot of different things that I could tweak.
Have you got one template document with all this text and you just copy and paste it into the applications? Does that work?
Back then I had it. I mean, it's not up to date anymore. Like when I did the very recently today, I did the UK content fund application.
Yeah.
And just had to write everything new because it's been a while since I did have to put in these really big forms. But yeah, once you build that up, you can apply it for a lot of things. But you always need your market data, the problem that you're solving, or the need, opportunity, and thinking of it in that way. And there's some really interesting design choices that can be made that will open doors. So it is about tweaking things, even when thinking about your market. Small design choices can have a huge impact on your market. So
So are you suggesting that sorry to interrupt, but when you're making a game, you're already looking at the grants you could access and adjusting the game to meet some of the requirements? Is that what you're suggesting?
Well, first off the market.
Not that there's anything wrong with that. There's nothing.
First off, I'm always focused on the market first, I would say. So I'm saying that I'm tutoring like a transducer team right now, and I'm making them look a bit at what design tweaks could be made to just widen your market, so you got an easier time with that. With grants, I don't think you should very much like completely adapt your game. I mean, I wouldn't have put guns in my game. So, yeah.
Even if they look brilliant.
Yeah, I know, they wouldn't look perfect.
Imagine she could make fruit look amazing.
Real, that's what I love about it.
Your entire budget would be gone in one done.
Exactly. But yeah, I think you shouldn't change too much like to just please grants, but it's about thinking outside of the box, like how you phrase things. Like cozy games all have that well-being value, right? Like how can you actually describe that in a grant application and make Innovate UK, care about it. So I think there's lots to tweak.
Innovate UK, the grants are quite difficult to get. Actually, some of the language is quite specific. People have said before that it's fairly complicated. Did you get any assistance when you were filling in some of those? Did you talk to any companies that have done it, or did you just say, I can do this, I'm going to do it, and it all worked?
Yeah, I did it myself, but I mean, I was helping other people with it too, but yeah, I think, when you come from a few business accelerators and essentially you know how to, write those texts like the market and the business need, and you know that the most important thing is always to put some quotes or some data in front of people, and you just start working your way towards having those, then I think, yeah, I didn't need any help there.
It says in my notes you've got an epic mega grant. They're quite difficult to get. I've tried a couple of times and failed dismally, and I know people at Epic and it's still not working. So what did you do right that I did wrong? What did you get that for?
But also the game, of course. Well, I'm sure that in that application, it was probably mostly focused on just really advertising the life simulation angle and the well-being benefits of like nature exploration, and yeah, I mean, must have been that.
Yeah, that wasn't what my application was for. So for people in the room, it sounds like you would advocate and recommend getting in those grant applications as much as possible. Is it still something you pursue now? I mean, let's say your game is successful, it's growing, and your studio is growing. Will you still look at grants as a process of bringing in funding?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, I have my eyes on the Scottish Smart Grant for any kind of like technology/innovation, like related systems that we would be building. And I always check in with the Innovate UK grants for anything around sustainability or something like that. There's a grant from Ochre, which is about games and well-being, but I didn't win that one yet. So. But yeah.
Is there a list? You just cross them out every time you get them. There's a hit list. Can we move away from funding a little bit? And one of the other important things, and we've heard it several times tonight, is about the sort of the identity of a studio and the way that you go that way. I want to find out what it's like to be in Edinburgh. What's it like being in? What's a really highly creative ecosystem here? How are you finding it?
Well, I mean, I love Scotland. That's why I moved here, and I studied here. My studio is remote though, so it does often feel like, oh, I wish I had a studio, and I wish I had, a place to actually go to work to, because I am just, essentially just at home, home office. That's kind of my thing. I didn't even know that there was a Taylor Swift concert happening here. How removed I am from reality of Edinburgh. So it's great to have these events. Actually go outside once in a while, except for when I go foraging and that.
I heard they moved thousands of people out when Taylor moved in, just to make the place look nicer. Is that true?
You're asking the wrong person.
Wow.
That
sounds scandalous.
Studios and
sorry if there's any local authority people here. So it's interesting. So you identify with being in Edinburgh studio in one way, but in the other way, because you're remote, you don't necessarily feel like you're part of the community. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, I was lucky enough to be connected to some, Edinburgh game devs, so I was hanging out with Tony.
Hitting the town with Tony, oh my word.
Yes.
He made a brilliant golf game. Have you brought it?
The talk was amazing.
I mean, so I suppose in a second I'll ask you what you're doing next. I always like to look forward and see what's coming up next. But you referenced that you're doing some work for Transfuser, so are you looking after a team? Oh, that's a brilliant thing to do. How are you finding that experience? I'm assuming it's very rewarding, but beyond that?
Oh, it's great. Honestly, I'm also mentoring someone through Limit Break, which is like a female-led studio making games with, that have like sign language translation as well. So I think quite interesting. Just essentially to bring in that, my mindset of focusing on the business, looking at the company, establishing the brand of that, the mission statement, all of these things. I think that's really valuable for emerging games industry startups, because essentially they're very focused on the product and they're very focused, for example, on their artistic expression. And I just give them some examples of things that I've heard. For example, like of Netspeed Games, how they actually tested their art style before they decided to go on one, by doing Facebook ads and gathering data and seeing what performed best. And I always try and just encourage people to think about it. Like the team that I'm mentoring right now, they're doing this really cute game about a hermit crab, and I think it's just really important to look at the design of that main character, because I've seen, for example, a game on Kickstarter fail because not fail, get funded but barely, because the main character was just not attractive to that audience. So the audience is a cozy female audience, but the main character was a big stone golem, like hunchback, and so it's just like these small things that I'm trying to point out.
I mean, things that might seem obvious don't seem obvious to other people, and that's where someone that's been through it and done it is invaluable. So, well done on that. And a big shout out to Limit Break. Most of the Ukie team are either mentors or being mentored. And both at the same time sometimes, which is fascinating. So it's a brilliant way of doing it. Yeah, that's the way to do it. Before I ask you what's next for Yaldi, then, are there any questions from the audience for Lena? I think Peter's the problem. Oh, sorry.
I was just wondering, regarding the foraging, it sounds fascinating, by the way, but I was curious about the legal considerations that might come with that, because you said that it was real life education as well. So what if somebody was so wrong?
Has anyone died playing your game when you take some foraging? I think that's where it's an interesting question, though. Are you responsible for that kind of approach? And
well, we're very much going to copy the whole foraging book legal disclaimer with some really good solid terms of use. Essentially, when you buy a foraging book these days, you could also go on and pick the wrong thing and eat the wrong thing and die doing that. But yeah, essentially what we'll do is just, of course, protect ourselves through disclaimers and terms of use. But the interesting thing is that through the game, the game being a safe environment and our identification of plants and mushrooms being interactive and adapted to the seasons, which means that, for example, the seasonal model of yarrow, which is like a green plant, which they all are, looks different than the summer model. So you've got a spring model and a summer model, where essentially it enables you to know what that plant looks like in that season, and yet you have to click on the leaves, and it says feathery leaves, and you know what you have to look out for. Whereas the lookalike, and we're always including toxic lookalikes, and they're always in the same patch, is hemlock, which is the most poisonous plant in the UK, which has the most deaths. You immediately see the difference between those plants and their leaves shapes, and then in the summer you see the difference between their flower clusters, and it's just, it's in your face. It's actually so much better than books could ever be. But yeah, we'll be safe. We have to prepare, because America is our biggest market.
is it? Yeah. Well, another shout out for the lawyers then. That's a third shout out for lawyers tonight. This is unheard of.
Let's talk after.
So to finish with then, where are Yaldi going next? I don't want you to reveal any big news that you haven't made public knowledge yet, but...
we're very open.
Oh, yeah? Oh, okay. Well, tell us all then. What are you doing next?
What I'm currently doing is I want to find some really cool angel investors, because I'm a sole founder. I have a big vision. I would really like to get some experienced angels on board. Essentially with that, I'm also pitching to some VCs, just trying to like scope some interest, see what is the best stage for VC investment. And then the main idea is that we do want to launch early access, mostly because our game is a systems-based, life simulator. As long as we have, roughly like 10 to 15 hours of gameplay based on the systems that we have, with some exploration gallery.